Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship and to see so many colleagues from across the House in the Chamber today. Perhaps it's not surprising that on the other side of the Chamber we have the Minister, who is a redoubtable Minister, it has to be said, who picks up the poison chalice on so many occasions and it will do so doubtless well informed and with good humour today as he's done previously. But I beg to move that this House has considered the impact of planned changes to agricultural property relief and business property relief on small businesses. I refer to my declaration of interests as a recipient of campaign donations from businesses and indeed farmers across Beverley and Holderness. And given the rural nature of my seat, I will start by focusing on the twin impacts of the changes to APR and BPR on family farms, followed by the impact of changes to BPR on family businesses. Now, we have just a half-hour debate, as a colleague just said. Why so short for something so big? A good question. I think that means that I will be the sole speaker today, but I'm happy to try and bring as many interventions as I can because I know there is widespread concern. In her autumn budget, the Chancellor announced a significant change to agricultural property relief and business property relief, which is set to take effect from April 2026. She is imposing a 20% tax on the value of land and machinery exceeding £1 million, known by many of us to be a family farm tax. By the government's own estimates, this could result in one farm closing for every rural constituency every year. I'll give way to my honourable friend. Right honourable friend.
Oh, sorry, Sir Alex Shelbrooke.
In this debate, and I just draw members to my register of interest. But does my honourable friend share my concern that as small family farms disappear, have been in families for generations, that they know watercourses better than anybody else, and as these farms move to development, etc., that the flooding issues that may come as a result of that, they've lost the local knowledge that can prevent those flooding in other areas?
Well, I thank my right honourable friend for that intervention. On Friday, I visited Ian and Rebecca at Bygut Farm, just outside of Beverley, about 220 acres. And one of the issues they raised, apart from the fact that their profits would be wiped out by the expected inheritance tax for 10 full years, so saying I've got 10 years to pay it, the expected annual payment for 10 years would be greater than their profit last year. And they play that vital role, as my right honourable friend says, in looking after the watercourses, which, as I said, the villagers nearby don't know what a critical part they play in maintaining those watercourses. I'll give way to the honourable gentleman.
Well, commend the honourable gentleman for bringing this forward. He's absolutely right to bring it forward. My neighbours, all of my neighbours in Northern Ireland, the small farmers by their very nature, everyone will be impacted. The threshold of £1 million is too low. The threshold should be between 4 and 5 million. That would give a chance to retain the family farm. Does the honourable gentleman, has he had the opportunity to talk to the NFU or the Ulster Farmers Union to ascertain their opinion, legal opinion, which is exactly to be against what government is bringing about?
The honourable gentleman, I believe, Madam Chair, is absolutely right. If it was about hitting the huge investors, but they're the ones who will be least likely to be affected. The richest and most sophisticated will find it easiest to avoid. It's those small farmers, like the ones I visited on Friday, who are going to be most seriously impacted. It's a bit like the winter fuel payment cut. If they took it away from people who had an income of more than £25,000, it would be infinitely less controversial. The point is it hits people on very low incomes and hurts them the most. I'll give way to the honourable gentleman.
Does the honourable member accept that it also has an inequitable application across the United Kingdom? Because in some parts land values are higher than others, and in Northern Ireland they are the highest. Therefore, one will reach the threshold of £1 million sooner with less acreage in Northern Ireland than you will elsewhere, and where we have such a concentration of family farms, that will have a crippling effect on future generations.
Graham Stewart.
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for that intervention. Once that farmland is lost, it's gone forever. It's certainly gone forever from the families who, generation after generation, have been prepared to invest their time and their money into an asset which they never seek to realise. They merely use for a very low return on capital employed in order to feed the nation. As somebody said to me, of all the groups that you might possibly target, of all the profit maximising people you might think who have broad shoulders to pay more. Why would you pick people who sit on a multi-million-pound asset, take a derisory income from it, and get up at 4 in the morning to feed us? Of all the groups to target, this is the most absurd, and I hope the Minister, who has until 2026, can start to realise this. I give way to my honourable friend.
Thanks for allowing the intervention. I met a farmer a couple of weeks ago in my constituency who is 80 years old and has made arrangements for his passing and so on to the next generation. But the 7-year rule is unlikely to affect someone of that age. Would my honourable friend agree that perhaps a modest compromise by the government to allow for those sort of situations?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right. I spoke to another farmer in my constituency. His farm is owned by 3 people, and one of whom is his father, who has a third of it, and who has been in ill health lately and is in his early 80s and is highly unlikely to live for the next 7 years. All the planning that they put in responsibly to ensure that that farm continues to contribute to waterways, contributes to the environment and contributes to the nation's food security, all has been cast aside and turned over by this government's ill-thought-out plans. I'll give way to the honourable lady because she has been...
Member
Manuela Portigella.
for giving way. In my constituency of Stratford-on-Avon, many family farms exceed the threshold due to high value of the land and machinery. Does my honourable friend agree that these changes threaten to push family-run farms into the hands of large corporations and therefore eroding rural communities but also jeopardising our domestic food security?
Stewart.
The lady is absolutely right. That's exactly what it'll do. And that is not the intent, I'm sure, of the government. I mean, actually, to bolster the big international corporations and hurt the small player who's an embedded part of the community, like, so many I speak to, they really do genuinely try and run their farm to be supportive of nature and to be supportive of local business. Once you have major corporations, they won't care where they get their supplies from. They won't be focused on that. I give way to my right honourable friend.
Mr McVeigh.
Well, does my right honourable friend agree with me that this brutal change to the inheritance tax, let's call it what it is, a family farm tax, will destroy family farms, will destroy farming in the UK as we know it, makes a nonsense of Labour believing in food security for the UK and needs to have a U-turn straight away. But the question I'm being asked now by my farmers, did this policy come about because they didn't know what they were doing and a lack of knowledge by the Labour Party of the farming community? Or will we look back at this and see it for what it is, theft by the state of land from private owners?
Well, I thank my right honourable friend, and I'll come further to that point in my speech. When that farmland is gone, it will take with it the livelihoods of families who've devoted generations to feeding our nation and will leave a permanent negative impact on the nation's food security. I'll give way to my right honourable friend.
Moves on too much further. I wonder if my right honourable friend would also agree that another effect of this is going to be, at a time when we need to unlock growth and unlock productivity, this will actually discourage and disincentivise investment in our family farms that's so badly needed.
Graham Stewart.
My right honourable friend is right, and that's why I'd appeal to the Minister. If you don't care at all, in fact, if you see farmers as some sort of class enemy, it still doesn't make sense to do this because it's, in fact, going to weaken our food security. And, as I say, if you go and talk to the farmers, as I do in my area all the time, it's not just words, their personal commitment to things like flood protection, to understanding of the land, thinking in the long term. You do think in the long term when you have no thought in your mind of selling it. Why wouldn't you put your money back in? You put all your money back in because you're happy to do so and you have a lifestyle as part of doing that. All of that is put under threat if the investment in that piece of machinery, investment in that piece of infrastructure which could help you green your land is actually going to be subject to a 20% tax And suddenly the economics don't add up and the bank won't want to lend. I'll give way to the honourable gentleman.
David Dugan.
I thank the right honourable gentleman. He'll be aware, as all of us in this room are, that we enjoy some of the most competitively priced fresh produce on GB anywhere available in Europe. And that is precisely because of the investments in production technology that family farms have made over generations. And is he concerned that at a stroke, this government, myopic about the workings of agriculture, has made them immediately overnight stop that investment, and consumers will feel that in the prices of food?
Well, the honourable gentleman raises
Graham
a really important point that hasn't been raised so far, is we have among the very lowest food costs in the world. In fact, all my farmers are forever moaning at me about how outrageous it is that it's so low in price. As I say to them back, I say, but it's also a Trump. But the system has allowed them to continue farming, providing first-class food at a very, very low cost to consumers. And it is that carefully balanced ecosystem, which this juggernaut creation of the government, which will raise, if it raises anything at all, will raise very little, which is why it's great to have someone as thoughtful, insightful and empathetic as the Minister on the bench opposite, because we have time to change path away from this ridiculous policy. I give way to my right honourable friend.
John Glenn.
I thank my right honourable friend. I think he's making a very clear case. Of course, there's a massive amount of agreement in the room. But does he not recognise that with the uncertainty around the land use framework, the government's interventions and intentions around the development of the work that we did on Elms, that farmers are facing a massive degree of uncertainty, and it would be far better if they paused, as the NFU are asking, to look at this in the round alongside the other policy decisions they need to make. There is plenty of time before next spring, and in particular address the issue around the age distribution of farmers, because actually for younger farmers there will be ways of mitigating this, but for older ones there simply isn't. But overall they lack clarity on what the future looks like, and that's a real concern.
Well, I thank my right honourable friend. So, at the very least, as it says, and as my honourable friend earlier touched upon, there are tweaks that could be made to this to stop the most egregious negative impact of this upon people who've planned in good faith all their lives for a position and are now in no position whatsoever to change things. But it's not just the elderly. Everyone looks for the elderly person in their 80s or whatever, 90s to pass on. I met another constituent whose mother died at aged 41. These things happen, sadly, and what does that do to a farm? Is it holding hundreds of thousands of pounds in the bank when there's 200 and something acres? It's not. I give way to the honourable gentleman.
The member for giving way. He'll be familiar possibly with my constituency of Aberdeenshire North, Murray East, one of the richest farming areas in the UK. The Treasury continues to insist that only around 520 estates a year will claim APR in the way that they're describing, and they have set this threshold at £1 million. Would you agree with me that the Minister needs to provide clear evidence for this threshold? Yeah. And is he aware that at the evidence session in December, the NFU claimed that the actual figure, rather than 520, is 2,000 estates involved?
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for his intervention, and he's right. And of course, the expert valuers who do this for a living have all come out, as I've seen. They're different numbers, but violently different to the assumptions of the government. But as I say, even on the basis of the government's own figures, I take Beverley and Holderness as a rural constituency, and that would be a farmer year. And of course, it's all everyone's affected. They're all having to spend, bring advisors in the room, and you're sitting there, a small business that might be making less than £25,000 a year, having to pay £1,000 an hour to get the expertise in the room to advise them on something which, sure, depending on the longevity of the family members, may not be impacted for 15, 20 or hopefully 30 years. Nonetheless, they're spending that money now because of the uncertainty of this policy, which is very ill-advised. I give way to my honourable friend.
I thank my right honourable friend for giving way and for bringing this debate. It is so very important. Just this morning, I was at the meeting on food security, speaking to poultry farmers there, and they were saying that they are already taking decisions not to invest in new buildings directly because they're now thinking of how they need to save for an APR bill. And of course, this has a knock-on effect on other businesses who will be the suppliers, and therefore we come into the BPR argument as well. Does he share my concerns that if farmers are not able to invest in their holdings, they're not going to be as profitable in the future, which makes a huge cycle in which this is a fulfilling prophecy, which is going to mean more farms are going to be impacted down the line?
Well, my honourable friend is
Graham
right,
Stewart.
and I would say, and again say to the Minister, that looking at it through some sort of, I don't know, fairness lens or attack wealth lens, you've got to look at it in terms of incentives. Incentives are what drives behaviour, and behaviour is what drives wealth creation, security. And if you come at it with some sort of, I don't know, A-level politics student's approach rather than one grounded in human behaviour and incentive, if you get that wrong, you will just see from farm to farm, business to business, reduced investment. And if you don't buy that new piece of plant and machinery, you won't invest in the training of your staff, you won't take on that extra employee who would have been brought on because in order to justify the expenditure, you needed to invest in them, pay them more, bring on more staff. All of that goes into reverse, and I hope as they come face to face with the realities of being responsible for the economy, that ministers in this government will take this on board and start to have a different philosophical, if you like, approach to the way they do policy. I give way to the honourable gentleman.
Freddie Van Mierlo.
The right honourable member for giving way. Does he share concerns that my farmers have about their mental health, who already are in an industry where mental health issues are very high? They're concerned about the deadline of April 2026 and what impact that could have on their well-being. Do you share those concerns?
Well, I do, and you've only got to meet farmers, and farming is already quite a lonely profession with a high level of suicide anyway and high rates of depression. And you combine that with this figure, it sounds a little hyperbolic to suggest that people are going to kill themselves ahead of this deadline. Knowing the farmers as I do in my area, I don't find it that hyperbolic. I hope it proves not to be the case, but it's a serious issue to be considered. I better make some progress and let the Minister come in. The impact of changes to BPR extends beyond farming communities. When asked about the changes, 85% of family businesses surveyed by the CBI said they would reduce investment by an average of 17%, the issues that the colleagues are raising. This will stifle long-term growth and harm the broader network of businesses that depend on them. Madam Chair, they say that trust takes years to build, seconds to break and forever to repair. As I walked down Whitehall shoulder to shoulder with farmers, their anger was palpable. Anger that they'd believed the Prime Minister's promises and yet were betrayed. Yeah. To Labour's credit, Madam Chair, they won the trust of rural Britain. Through every door knocked, every leaflet printed, every promise made, they went from representing 2 rural seats in 2019 to 40 today. The Prime Minister pledged to form a new relationship with farmers based on respect. My right honourable friend questions where those proud rural Labour MPs are today. They're certainly not here facing the music. As usual, they're leaving the Minister to do it on his own. He asked us to judge his government on its actions, not words. So that is what we will do. In November 2023, the current Environment Secretary looked a room full of farmers straight in the eye and told them, we have, and I quote, we have no intention of changing agricultural property relief. By November 2024, that promise meant nothing. Labour waited 14 years to deliver its budget, and they made a choice not just to change APR, but halve it. One constituent shared their shock as they calculated the impact, realising it would cost their family £300,000. Another, William Hodgson, who runs a 600-acre farm near Withensea, in my constituency with his mother, faces an inheritance tax bill of £1.5 million, with a post-tax profit of £150,000 per year. This means he'd have to dedicate an entire decade of profits just to cover the cost of that tax. And it was at that moment that the most valuable currency in politics, trust, was lost. In February 2024, the Prime Minister himself told the NFU that they, quote, deserve a government that listens, that heeds early warnings. The planned changes to APR aren't due until 2026, as I've said, leaving the Prime Minister with 1 year, 2 fiscal events and ample parliamentary sitting days, with many colleagues all too happy constructively to work with them, to come to this House and tell us that he has listened and that he'll change course. And the question is, does he have the courage to do so? It will have been hard to hear all of us and our chants while he was in Rio, while we were in Whitehall, and at farmers at the North London surgeries he attends will be few and far between. But I hope he'll listen to the Honourable Member for Penrith and Solway on his own side, who spoke bravely against this policy during the debate in the Chamber last month. He may have been scolded behind closed doors. I think I'd better just press on. He may have been scolded behind closed doors for doing so, but will have regained the trust of voters who put their trust in him. And as devastating as the proposed changes to APR and BPR could be on our farmers, the impact on the changes to family-owned business more widely could be even greater and perhaps deserves more attention. A recent report by Adriana Kirker at the CBI laid bare the potential fallout. Far from raising £1.4 billion as forecast by the Treasury, the Chancellor can expect a £1.2 billion decrease in tax revenue from family-owned businesses. Instead of helping the government to fulfil its pledge to be pro-business and pro-worker, it could lead to the loss of more than 125,000 jobs over the next 4 years. Now, Rachel from Accounts obviously never got a new abacus for Christmas. I would like, Maple Garage, Beverley Travel Company, Beverley Camera Centre, Oh My Dog, great place, Flower Style, Vivian Rose Wallpaper, Beverley Card Company, Isla Bloom, the Monkey Tree Cafe, Trent Galleries, Hull Aero Club. These are all businesses that I've spoken to since the budget. And the overwhelming sentiment was exactly the same, regardless of the type of business. Disappointment at a government that doesn't understand business. None of the cabinets ever run one, and it does show. When the Prime Minister promised that wealth creation would be his party's #1 priority. Do you remember? #1 priority. More than 120 business leaders believed him. From the founder of Wikipedia, Jimmy Wales, to Andrew Higginson, the chair of JD Sports. He convinced them that he had a plan to kickstart our economy. Now, 6 months into the reality of a Labour government, they're lacing up their trainers and running for the hills. Madam Chair, it doesn't have to be this way. Instead of tinkering with who is and isn't eligible for inheritance tax relief, we could look at following Sweden's example, where, having tried heavy inheritance tax charges, they ended up, I think I will have to just press on, they ended up, even I think, with the communists voted in the end to abolish it entirely. And since they scrapped inheritance tax in 2004, entrepreneurship has flourished. 8,000 wealthy individuals moved their assets back to the country, and their tax revenues increased by 19.5 billion in a decade. The planned changes to APR and BPR hurt everyone and help no one. Scrapping inheritance tax may not be a silver bullet, Madam Chair, but the evidence suggests it's a policy worth continuing, examining. To return to that quote earlier, trust takes forever to repair. The Prime Minister won't take my word for it, but he should listen to his voters. And recent polls show that 66% of voters believe that Labour doesn't respect rural communities, and 77% don't trust Labour to manage the economy effectively or remain unconvinced. Now, newer MPs may grandstand and say that this will all blow over, although their appetite to do so seems to be diminishing by the day, and that by 2029 this will be a bad memory for farmers and entrepreneurs. Maybe they could ask some of their colleagues in the Liberal Democrats how that story ends. After all, it took them less than 6 months to break their promise to students in 2010 not to raise tuition fees, and it still came up in last summer's TV debates. Farmers and businessmen, like students, have long memories. Madam Chair, I'm a firm believer that you reap what you sow, and in the last 6 months the government has sown a dangerous thing, seeds of doubt, an idea that they can't be trusted. So, Madam Chair, I better let the Minister have a short period to respond, but on behalf of colleagues right across this side of the House, and I think by their absence, quite a number of colleagues on that side of the House, we say to the Minister, who, as I say, is a thoughtful and decent man, to go back to the Chancellor and the Prime Minister and persuade them to change course.
The question is that this House has considered the impact of planned changes to agricultural property relief and business property relief on small businesses. I call Minister James Murray.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and it's a pleasure to speak in this debate with you as Chair. And I congratulate the Right Honourable gentleman, the Member for Beverley and Holderness, for securing this debate. He likewise is always thoughtful in his contributions, so I'm always glad to hear from him, and indeed the interventions which he allowed during his speech. I know members have obviously raised questions about the reforms that we're making, and I will turn to them in a moment to try and address as many of the questions as I can. But let me first start by briefly reminding members of the economic context in which these decisions were taken, because at the autumn budget, we took difficult but necessary decisions on tax, welfare and spending to restore economic stability, fix the public finances and support public services. These were tough decisions given the situation we inherited from the previous administration, and we took them in a way to make the tax system fairer and more sustainable, and the decision to reform agricultural property relief and business property relief was not taken lightly. These reforms mean that despite the tough fiscal context, the government will maintain very significant levels of relief from inheritance tax beyond what is available to others. The government, I will give way maybe once or twice, but I haven't got much time.
Richard Ford.
I don't question the Minister's difficult inheritance, but the Labour Party advisor, Dan Needle, suggests that the plan to slap inheritance tax on farms worth over £1 million should be replaced with a much higher threshold with a clawback mechanism, so that if it was for land over £20 million, once they are sold, that would tackle the Dysons of the world without tackling small family farms. What does the Minister think of this proposal?
James Murray.
Thank you. I'm just about to come on to the details of the reforms that we've made to agricultural property relief and business property relief. So if the honourable gentleman waits a moment, he can see some of the reasoning behind the decisions that we took, because the government recognises the role that the reliefs play, particularly in supporting farms and small businesses. And under our reforms, they will continue to play an important role in supporting them. I think, Madam Chair, the case for reform is underlined by the fact that the full unlimited exemption, which was introduced in 1992, had become unsustainable. Under the current system of relief, the benefit of the 100% relief on business and agricultural assets has become heavily skewed towards the wealthiest estates. According to the latest data from HMRC, 40% of agricultural property relief benefits the top 7% of estates making claims. That's 117 estates claiming £219 million of relief. And it's a similar picture for business property relief. More than 50% of business property relief is claimed by just 4% of estates making claims. That equates to 158 estates claiming £558 million in tax relief. Now, I've only got a few moments. I'm going to make progress. Now, the Leader of the Opposition has made clear that she would prioritise this tax break within the public finances, but we do not believe it is fair or sustainable to maintain such a large tax break for such a small number of the wealthiest claimants, given the wider pressures on the public finances. So it is for these reasons that the government is changing how we target agricultural property relief and business property relief from April 2026. We are doing so in a way that maintains a significant tax relief for estates, including for small farms and businesses, whilst repairing the public finances in a fair way. Now, let me be clear that individuals will still benefit from 100% relief for the first £1 million of combined business and agricultural assets. On top of that, as we know, there will be a 50% relief, which means that inheritance tax will be paid at a reduced effective rate of up to 20% rather than the standard 40%. Importantly, these reliefs sit on top of all the existing spousal exemptions and nil rate bans. So depending on individual circumstances, up to £3 million can be passed on by a couple to their children or grandchildren free of inheritance tax.
I do way. At the Oxford Farming Conference, the Secretary of State suggested that farms should diversify in order to be more profitable, but diversification has now become a lot less incentivised because that all gets wrapped up into the BPR as well as the APR. So does that not completely negate the Secretary of State's argument for diversification if it's all going to be taken away in tax?
James Murray.
Well, my right honourable friend made an important point about diversification, but whatever category the assets fall into, the amount that I was referring to, the up to £3 million that can be passed on by a couple to their children or grandchildren free of inheritance tax applies, because that applies across agricultural and business property relief. But the point I was making is that the agricultural property relief and business property relief sit on top of the existing transfers and nil rate bans. And so when considering individual circumstances, you must look at the individual details that an individual or a couple face in their situation. Now, I've got 1 minute left, Madam Chair, so I will simply say very briefly that in terms of some of the statistics referred to in interventions today, we heard some questioning about some of the statistics about how many estates will be affected. But we are very clear, and we've published this data, and the Chancellor has written to the Treasury Select Committee about this, that around up to 520 estates those claiming agricultural property relief, including those claiming business property relief as well, will be affected by these reforms to some degree. This means around 3/4 of estates claiming agricultural property relief, again including those also claiming business property relief, will not pay any more tax as a result of these changes in the year they introduced. All estates making claims for these reliefs will continue to receive generous support at a total cost still of £1.1 billion to the Exchequer, and the OBR has been clear they do not expect this measure to have any significant macroeconomic impacts. Madam Chair, I will close simply by thanking all honourable members who contributed today.
Order. The sitting is suspended until 2:30.